The line is barely visible now. The ink is brown, once black, fading toward the color of dried tea. The handwriting tilts slightly to the right. The letters thin at the end of each word, the way a clerk's hand thins when he has been at the desk for hours. October 1858. The Vilna Governorate. Russia's 10th revision census. I am looking at the photograph of a single page from a registry book. It has been sitting in a regional archive in what is now Lithuania for 168 years. The page lists a single household, a father registered as Leba, 3 sons. Below his name, the clerk has written the family surname twice, Polyak, Polyak, and then, on the line for the 3rd son, a different surname entirely. Gurevitz. Same household, same door, same biological family. 3 brothers walking in and out of the same house, 2 of them, on paper, named Polyak. The 3rd one is now, on this single line of ink, the founder of a different family tree. There is no marginal note, no correction, no second pen mark to suggest the clerk caught his own mistake. He simply wrote it that way and moved on. I am not telling you this to sell you anything. I want to know why. I want to be careful, right up front. I am not going to tell you tonight that your grandmother's last name was secretly something else. I am not going to tell you that the family stories you grew up with are part of a hidden civilization. That kind of video is everywhere on this platform. Most of it is wrong in specific, checkable ways. What I want to do is much smaller, and I think much stranger. I want to look at what we can prove, because once you start looking, actually looking, in archives, in census revisions, in the surviving paperwork of the 19th and 20th centuries, you find something. The act of changing a person's name is not a rare event. It is not a romantic event. It is a bureaucratic event. It happens because a clerk has a quota. It happens because a directive came down from a ministry 6 months ago, and a village registrar is just now getting around to enforcing it. It happens because a household had to be registered for tax purposes by the end of the fiscal year. The 3rd son in the Vilna Governorate did not lose his family name in some grand conspiracy. He lost it because the man holding the pen was tired, which leaves a question I keep coming back to. If a name can be lost like that, quietly, on a Tuesday, at the end of a long shift, by a man who is not even thinking about what he is doing, how many other names are gone? How far back does this go? And how would we know? The reason that registry book in Vilna existed at all, the reason there was a clerk to write Polyak and Gurevitz in 3 lines, is a piece of paper signed in St. Petersburg 54 years earlier. In 1804, Tsar Alexander I issued what was officially called the Statute Concerning the Organization of Jews. It was a long document. Most of it dealt with where Jewish families were allowed to live, what professions they could enter, where their children could be schooled. But buried inside it was an administrative instruction that would change millions of personal histories. The Tsarist government ordered that every Jewish family in the newly acquired Pale of Settlement, a territory running roughly from modern Lithuania down through Belarus, Ukraine, and into Moldova, must adopt a fixed, hereditary surname. The detail that mainstream history books usually skip is who chose the names. It was not the families. It was the local Russian officials. In the regional archives across the former Pale, you can still find the records. A village registrar receives the imperial directive. He is told he has to assign hereditary surnames to every Jewish household in his district by a certain date. He has, in many cases, never met these people. He does not speak their language. He looks at the man in front of him, glances at his profession, his appearance, his place of origin, sometimes the name of his father, and writes something down. This is documented in detail in the work of the genealogist Alexander Bider. His Dictionary of Jewish Surnames from the Russian Empire is the closest thing we have to an archive of how this actually worked. Bider's research turns up something that, when you sit with it, becomes hard to forget. Members of a single biological family, brothers, sometimes a father and his sons, were routinely registered under different surnames. Not because they wanted different names, because the clerk processing the household assigned them differently. One brother gets a toponymic name from the village. The next brother, an hour later, gets an occupational one from his trade. The names come from completely different etymological pools, but they are biological siblings. A son who happened to be staying with an uncle that week might be entered into the uncle's household and given a different surname. A boy too young to be working might be listed under his mother's family designation. The decisions were made fast. They were almost never revisited. By 1850, the Russian government issued a follow-on edict that froze the situation in place. It became illegal for Jewish families to change the surnames they had been assigned. The names handed out in haste, in 1804 and 1811 and 1834, became permanent. The third son in our Vilna page, with his different surname, is not a mystery. He is the rule. To understand what did not survive the paperwork, you have to look at a different community in a different part of the same empire. Several thousand kilometers east of Vilna, in the western part of Siberia, there is a region around the city of Tomsk where a different population has been living for centuries. They speak a Turkic language. Their settlements predate Russian arrival. They are, in the academic literature, called the West Siberian Tatars. In recent decades, linguists studying their villages noticed something quiet but measurable. The given names in those villages, the personal first names parents were giving their children, were generationally shifting. From traditionally Tatar names to Russian forms, not all at once, not by decree, just slowly, over a generation, then another, then another. The grandmother is named Aliyah, the mother is named Alina, the daughter is named Aliona. This is documented in regional onomastic surveys, the academic study of names. And it gets at something the 1804 decree does not capture. You don't always need a czar. You don't always need a clerk. Sometimes the pressure is just the school registration form, the hospital intake, the application for the apartment. The form does not have a slot for your name, so your name shifts. 2 centuries after the Pale of Settlement, in a different ethnic community, in a different language family, in a different geography, so the same outcome. Identity yields to administration. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. I keep coming back to a question I cannot quite let go of. If we can document this pattern in just 2 centuries, in 2 communities, in 1 country, how confidently can any of us read our family names back beyond about 1800? If this kind of investigation is worth your time, slow, archival, refusing the easy story, the channel runs on viewers who think this way. Subscribing helps. There is no merch, no course, no paid newsletter. Just the next document, the next registry, the next question. Okay. Here is the thing about archives. They are honest about what they contain. They are silent about what they don't. The Vilna Registry book contains a third son's lost surname. It does not contain the name his father called him at home. It does not contain what his grandmother whispered when no one else was listening. It does not contain the family's oral history of where they came from, 3 or 4 generations back, before the Russian Empire's pen ever found them. That earlier history is what older maps gestured at, though, as you will see, gestured at is doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. I want to show you 3 maps, not to prove anything, to set up a question. The first one is the oldest. It was drawn by Abraham Ortelius, a Flemish cartographer, in 1570. It appeared in the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, generally considered the first true atlas in Western publishing history. The map is labeled, in Latin, Tartaria sive magni chami imperi vem. It depicts an enormous region, running, in Ortelius's rendering, from the Caspian Sea east across all of Inner Asia to the Pacific, from Persia and India north into the Arctic. Inside this region, Ortelius draws nomadic encampments, mounted riders, mountains, rivers. He labels subdivisions, Cathay, Tangut, Mongol territories, the lands of the Khans. The next map is from 1606, drawn by Jodocus Hondius. later reprinted in the famous Mercator Hondius Atlas of 1633. It shows the same broad region. It includes the conjectural Strait of Anian, a waterway European cartographers thought might separate Asia from America. We now know the strait, in the form they imagined it, does not exist. The third map is from 1757, issued by the Amsterdam firm Covens and Mortier, based on the work of Guillaume de Lisle. De Lisle was the most respected geographer of his era. He held the title Premier Géographe du Roi, first geographer to the King of France. He was the cartographer who corrected dozens of older maps for accuracy, who narrowed the size of the Mediterranean, who repositioned the Caspian, who refused to print coastlines he did not have first-hand reports for. He labels his map, Map of the Great Tartary, 3 maps, 3 centuries, 3 different cartographers across 3 different European powers, all of them using the same word. So what was Tartary? The qualifier matters here, because the answer to that question has, in the last 7 or 8 years, become its own industry on the internet. There are channels with millions of subscribers built around a particular answer. There are forums. There are influencer priests of the topic. Their answer is that Tartary was a unified global empire, larger than any in recorded history. They claim it vanished from the historical record in some kind of cataclysm or coordinated suppression event in the 18th or 19th century. That a hidden technological civilization existed and was erased by, depending on which channel you watch, the Romanovs, the Vatican, Freemasons, lizards, or some combination. I am not going to tell you that is true. I am not going to tell you it is false either. I am going to tell you what the archives can and cannot support. The Library of Congress's Geography and Map Division published a piece on this in June of 2025 that I would recommend. They tracked the word Tartaria across Western maps for 2.5 centuries. What they found is that the labeled region of Tartaria shifts location and borders constantly. Across maps from Ortelius in 1570 through Covens and Mortier in 1757. Sometimes it is centered on Crimea, sometimes it is all of Siberia, sometimes it is only Manchuria. The borders do not hold still. Their argument, and the argument of standard reference works, is that Tartaria was not a polity. It was a European catch-all toponym. A word Europeans used for the parts of Inner Asia they did not understand and could not access reliably. The closer European travelers got, the more the word fragmented into actual nations. Mongol Khanates, Manchu territories, the Volga Bulgars, the Crimean Tatars, the various Turkic peoples of Central Asia. This is the mainstream answer. It is defensible. It probably does most of the work. But I want to sit with what it does not quite answer. Because honesty requires that too. The mainstream answer explains why Tartaria looks different on different maps. It does not explain why a single word held that much imaginative space in European cartography for nearly 300 years. It does not explain why de Lisle, the geographer who corrected dozens of older maps for accuracy, kept using the term. It does not, on its own, account for why the populations that lived in those regions, the actual Tatars, the actual Bulgars, the actual peoples Europeans were trying to label, would experience in the 20th century an organized effort to rewrite their histories. That last part is documented. I want to show you the document. August 9th, 1944. In 1957, the United States Central Intelligence Agency produced an internal document titled National Cultural Development Under Communism. It was classified for decades. It was declassified in 1999. You can read it today on the CIA's own electronic reading room. Document identifier CIA-RDP78-02771R 000200090002-6. I am going to quote one line from it carefully, because this exact line is, on the conspiracy side of the internet, the single most overused and misrepresented sentence in the entire Tartaria meme. The CIA document references a directive issued on August 9, 1944. by the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The directive ordered the Tatar Provincial Committee, and I am reading the language of the order itself, to proceed with a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria in order to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character. That is a real directive. The CIA document is real. The order from the Central Committee is real. It is not, and I want to draw a line under this, a confirmation that a global Tartarian empire existed. The Tartaria in that order refers to the historical region inhabited by the Tatar people, the Turkic Muslim population of Crimea and the Volga and Central Asia. The scientific revision was an order to make Tatar history fit Soviet ideology. But what makes the document genuinely chilling is what comes immediately after. The CIA report notes that the 1944 directive was not isolated. It states that in every Muslim area within the USSR, on orders of the Communist Party, historians had rewritten history, that existing histories had been withdrawn and destroyed. That is what the August 1944 directive was. It was an order to destroy the existing histories of an entire people and replace them with sanctioned versions. And it was issued in the same year as something much more concrete. In May of 1944, 3 months before the historical revision directive, Stalin's government carried out an operation called the Surgun. Over the course of approximately 72 hours, beginning on May 18th, around 191,000 Crimean Tatars, almost the entire population, were forced from their homes onto cattle cars and deported to Uzbekistan. Estimates of the death rate during the deportation and the immediate aftermath range, depending on the source, Soviet archival figures, Western historians, Crimean Tatar national bodies, from 18% to 46%. So the timeline is this. In May, the Soviet state physically removes the Crimean Tatars from their land. In August, the Soviet state orders the rewriting of their history. You take a people out of a place, then you take the place out of the books. The official explanation collapses here, because there isn't one, not from the Soviet side. The 1944 directive remained internally classified for decades. It was the CIA, not the Soviet Union, that surfaced its existence to a Western readership in 1957. The qualifier again, because it matters. This is not evidence of a global civilization. It is evidence, verified, archival, sourced, of a real, documentable, ethnically targeted erasure that took place in the actual geography that older European maps had been calling Tartary for 3 centuries. The empire claim is a fantasy. The erasure is not. April 2018. There is one more layer to this, and it is the strangest of the 3, because it happens in our own time. In April of 2018, on a small forum called stolenhistory.org, a user posting under the name Corbin Dallas published a thread about anomalies in the architecture of the Russian Empire. The post drew on older fringe traditions. Anatoly Fomenko's new chronology work from the 1980s and 90s, scattered alternative history blogs from the 2000s. He synthesized them into a new framing. He called it the Tartarian Empire. The framing was specific. Not Tartary the European toponym, not the historical Tatar peoples, not the documented Russification of Turkic names. A unified global supercivilization. Technologically advanced. Wiped out in a coordinated event sometime in the late 1800s. You can track its spread. Google Trends data shows the term Tartarian Empire was effectively absent from search histories before late 2018. Within 2 years, it had millions of monthly searches. Within 4 years, the YouTube videos using the framing had cumulatively passed tens of millions of views. The original forum, stolenhistory.org, eventually went offline and was replaced by a successor site, stolenhistory.net. If you read the introduction threads there carefully, and I have, you find something interesting. The most upvoted repeated take from longtime forum members is, paraphrased, that Tartary was real, but the Tartarian Empire as marketed online has muddied the genuine research and may even be a deliberate disinformation campaign laid over the actual history. Even inside the forum, The more careful members suspect the meme is a layer placed on top of something true. I keep thinking about the structure of this. In 1804, the Tsarist Russian state assigned surnames to Jewish families in the Pale, splitting biological families across multiple names by clerical accident. In 1944, the Soviet Central Committee ordered the rewriting of Tatar history, while the Crimean Tatar people were being physically deported from Crimea. In 2018, an anonymous forum user invented the name of an empire that never existed and laid it over the documented history of an actual erased civilization, where it has now grown into a meme with tens of millions of views. Each of these is a kind of overwriting. The first is administrative, names by accident. The second is political, history by directive. The third is mimetic, a fiction grafted onto a wound. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Recognition. After a while, you stop being able to read paperwork the same way. The Tsarist state in 1804 did not need to believe in any grand conspiracy to overwrite a third son's last name. It needed a tax registry deadline. The Soviet state in 1944 did not need to invent a hidden empire to erase a people's history. It had cattle cars and a central committee and a directive on file. The Internet, in 2018, did not need a global cabal to overwrite the real story of Tatar erasure with the story of a fictional global empire. It needed a charismatic post on a small forum and a recommendation algorithm. Each layer is more recent than the last. Each layer is more efficient. The 1804 decree took decades to register every household. The 1944 deportation took 72 hours. The 2018 meme took about 4 years to reach tens of millions. What I am describing is not a conspiracy. A conspiracy requires coordination. This is something else. This is a property of how identity gets handled when it meets a system. Any system. Imperial bureaucracy, Soviet ideology, attention algorithm. The system does not have to mean to erase you. It just has to be efficient. Here is the part where the alternative history YouTuber would, in their script, pivot to telling you that you are descended from a hidden civilization, that your real birthright has been stolen. That is the empire payoff. It sells. I am not going to tell you that. I do not have evidence for it. Neither does anyone else. But I will tell you something quieter, which I think is more haunting. If just 2 centuries of paperwork can split a single Vilna household into 2 surnames, if a single 1944 directive can hollow out the documented history of a Turkic people, if a single forum post in 2018 can recolor how millions of people understand their own ancestry, then the question is not whether your family name was changed. The question is how far back you can read. I want to go back to the page. October 1858. The Vilna Governorate. The clerk's pen tilting slightly to the right. Leba. Polyak. Gurevitz. I do not know who that third son was. I do not know if he ever realized that on paper, in the Imperial Archive, he was no longer his father's son in the same way his brothers were. I do not know if his children knew. I do not know if his great-great-grandchildren, alive somewhere right now, know that the surname they carry was assigned by a tired man at the end of a long shift in a building that no longer stands. I do not know what his family had been called before 1804. The records for that do not survive. The Tsarist decree did not require it. The clerks did not preserve it. That is the part I keep returning to. Not a lost empire, not a hidden civilization. Just a name that existed before October 1858 and after October 1858 did not. Maybe it was a Yiddish patronymic. Maybe it was Hebrew. Maybe it was a Turkic loanword from the families that had moved through that region for centuries before the Pale was drawn. Maybe it was something his grandmother whispered when no one else was listening. I do not have the answer. The archive does not either. What I have is the line of ink and the question of what came before it. What you have somewhere in your own family is probably a version of the same question. Identity yields to administration. The clerk's pen moves on. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The third son is still there on the page. Same household, same door, same family. Just a different name.